Welcome to Judaism Today, our program, Raising Jewish Children, with our guests, Shira Zell, who we'll introduce as the Rebbitzin of Clark, and we'll get an explanation of what that is. Also, she is a teacher at the Solomon Schechter Day School in Cranford. And Dr. Gloria Schrager, who is a clinical professor of pediatrics at the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, and was the former director of pediatrics at Overlook Hospital in Summit. Welcome to Judaism Today, although both of you are old friends, so that we're not strangers. The subject that we're here to talk about is obviously a very sensitive subject, and in certain ways a very difficult subject to discuss. But I think that with the kind of background that you can bring to this subject, I think you can help a lot of people who may be looking to get some questions answered that just would find it difficult to get access to the kind of information you can bring them. First, let's begin by trying to give some insight as to why in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish community, education of children is given such a great emphasis. Shira, would you begin?
I think that because, for one thing, in the Bible and in a prayer that we recite daily, the Shema, is the emphasis on teaching and passing it on to your children. So from the time of the Bible, from the 5 books of Moses on, the impact and the importance of teaching generation to generation of anything has really been very important. And I think it's passed through since it is part of our prayers.
Anything you would add to that?
Well, I think from the standpoint of pediatrics, our whole emphasis has always been that as you shape the child, so you shape the adult. And the importance of developing very early a sense of who you are, what your self-image is, and building on it. And I think particularly in terms of religious identification, that has very important significance in a person's whole orientation to life itself and many other fields.
This really leads to the next question, which is raising a Jewish child really that much different or a different level of challenge than anyone else? Is there something special about what we try to do with raising a Jewish child that is really more difficult or more complex?
I think so, because actually we represent a minority culture in a much larger culture which has different senses of identification. And I think now this generation particularly, which has moved out of the more homogeneous neighborhoods of the past and has become part of a larger community, finds it possibly a little bit more difficult to identify as Jews with so many non-Jewish neighbors and friends. And I think it's rather important to remember who you are and not to develop a sense of alienation because your beliefs are different from those of your neighbors.
One of the things that I'm really thinking about is that at the same time, and you kind of touched on it, but at the same time that we teach a child to retain their distinctiveness, their whatever is we feel is special about the Jewish people, yet at the same time be a part of the community. Is that something that you could comment on, that almost a duality that we're trying to teach them two things at the same time?
I think part of it, the basic upbringing of any child, regardless of the religion, I would think is to be a good, decent human being, what we would refer to as a mensch, to realize that what really counts in the person is their inner soul, their neshama, not to judge a book by its cover, respect, the derech eretz, the common courtesy. These are values that are any human being hopefully would find important and put it on top priority. But I think adding to it, you have the Jewish aspect of why, or the examples through our history and through the Bible that teach us that we ought to be this way, and we ought to be able to hopefully set an example in helping the world become a better place.
Then we get to the next question. At what age do we start teaching things that complex? Because you're talking about very heavy things, and when do you begin that?
I don't think there's anything as too soon. I think that even from a very, very young age, when children are playing and grabbing toys and things like that, you could say, don't do that. Or if someone helps out another child, you could say that person is a mensch, a decent, upstanding, human being. Our own son came home a couple of years ago, and he's only in 3rd grade now, and he referred to a boy in his class as that, with that child's name, saying he is a mensch because that boy helped him out in school, and he came home and totally unsolicited said, hey, that boy is a mensch. And if you instill this at a very young age, then these concepts and values aren't foreign, and it becomes hopefully a part of their own being.
At what age can we really talk about trying to reach children with the kind of values that we're talking about?
Well, I agree with Shira. There's no such thing as too young. And again, it's a question of establishing good role models. Now, you can preach to a child, and of course then you say, well, a child really doesn't understand until they're school age, etc., these concepts that parents try to teach. But I think it goes back much earlier in terms of role models. And an infant picks up quite readily on parents' behavior and how, what consistency there is, what honesty there is, what kind of mutual respect there is.
Are we talking a year or even less, a year old or even less?
Yeah,
that they begin
really,
to pick up things like
sure.
this? So people should really be concerned about the effects they have on their children as role models, even that early.
Absolutely. And again, it's not what you say, it's what you do that really makes the difference and affects how your child will grow up.
When can we talk about actually getting a child to sense this distinctiveness of being Jewish? When does a child actually begin to sense that they are in some way different? That they are going to be living to a different set of rules, things are going to be expected of them that perhaps other people are not expected?
Well, here again, it differs with every child, but I think that from infancy on, you can incorporate the child into the observances of the family. I know it with my own grandchild now, of course, you remember things so much better. You observe things so much closer with the grandchildren than in the process of raising your own children. But I don't think he was a year when he recognized that Shabbat was different. And the candles were lit, and he had on his little yarmulke, and he helped blow out the candles. And before we knew it, he was saying a few of the words and ending the Amen. Now, this was really just at about a year or so. Again, not solicited, not talked to, but just in being part of a family experience.
No, your question had also dealt with, the sense of being different. And I think that would be part of it, is being aware of the world, the non-Jewish world around him. And I think that unless the Jewish children are being raised in an exclusive Jewish area, almost, a ghetto, so to speak, just being around for the big, December month, and we'll do it anytime. Walking through a mall with a little child at that time of year with Santas all over the place. And personally, hopefully many Jewish parents don't sit on have a child sit on Santa's lap. That already, and grown children don't sit on Santa's lap. So with that's a very young age that you would start instilling, no, we observe Hanukkah, we don't have Christmas. The beauty of a weekly Sabbath, a weekly Shabbat, can really make the child feel special because that's a weekly holiday that he or she is able to celebrate.
So actually we're saying that the process really begins at a very early age, as early as we can possibly try to do it. The next stage that we would really get into is as we start to relate, as the child starts to relate to the community. What's the relative role of the parents in this respect versus the role of the community in developing that child?
Well, I think the primary role is the parental one. The community obviously has an effect. I think probably later on when the child is approaching adolescence and begins to have the impact of peer groups and separation from the family play a greater role. But I think the point that Shira touched on is a particularly important one, and that is, how do you keep your child's sense of identity and pride in his own religion when all about him are signs of another religion, another observance that he is not part of? And I know this is very difficult for parents, and very often there's a sense of, well, he wants to be one of the gang, and why should we deprive him? It really doesn't have a religious significance, but of course it does. And I think the basic thing is that if you begin to borrow from another religion, which is not yours, the child is basically uncomfortable. He might like to sit on Santa's lap, but he knows that he's different. And if his parents press it or seem to admire the other one, he gets a sense that possibly they're imitating something which, because they are imitating it, is better than what he has. And so I think there's a significant danger in saying, well, let him have the Christmas tree, let him sit on Santa's lap, let's celebrate Christmas. It's a beautiful holiday for the people who believe in Christmas. But Jewish children know that Christmas is really not their holiday. And if their parents make a big thing about it, I think they begin to sense that theirs is somehow diminished in the process.
Self-doubt.
Right.
Yep. We have to take a break now. We'll be back in just a minute with our program, Raising Jewish Children, with Dr. Gloria Schrager and Shira Zell. Welcome back to our program, Raising Jewish Children, with Shira Zell and Dr. Gloria Schrager. At some point, parents in raising their children have to start making some decisions about what they're going to do in terms of things like how much of an identification are they going to give them in terms of their Jewishness, what kinds of education are they going to give them. When should parents really begin to start thinking about this?
I think before the children are born. I think you have to have the sense of who you are and be comfortable with it.
I mean, the parents have to have it first.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If the children are going to have it, or you want your children to have it, you have to have it yourself.
And I guess you can't fake it, and you can't give them an identification that you don't have.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So all of this really has to be worked out. You don't have too much time.
Well, you know, I think that these are things, it's difficult for young people getting married to face the sort of heavy things of how you're going to raise children when that's a little bit in the future. But I think that as soon as they begin planning to have children, these are issues that have to be settled between the two, because that's another very dangerous thing. If one parent believes more strongly than another, either one way or the other, and there's a sense of conflict, that makes for very confused kids.
What are some of the kinds of choices that parents have to make?
Well, to what degree they want to observe their religion, if at all.
In the home, let's say.
In the home. And since the title of this program is Raising Jewish Children, I assume that these parents have made, or the parents who would be interested in this, have made that decision that they want their children to be raised with a firm sense of identification that they are Jews. And if they want that, they must have that identification, because they are the basic role models, and they cannot say, okay, I'll send the kid to a Hebrew school or to whatever, but forget it, that's not for me. If it's not for them, it probably won't be for the children either. Now, obviously, there are exceptions, and there are very influential role models in various schools and synagogues and so on that can influence an individual child. But if we're talking about the overall concept and what is most statistically likely to happen, the children will be what the parents are.
Any other choices that parents have to make you can think of?
I think in addition to their own commitment and what they're practicing in the house within their own family, I think also having to be made, at least once they start thinking about having children, is the whole direction they're going to go with their child's education and with their affiliation with Jewish institutions, particularly the synagogue. You can raise a child Jewishly and be observant and things like that by yourself. It's a lot more difficult if you, however, can find a synagogue that has other children, a younger group, the camaraderie. It makes it more pleasant. It makes it more exciting if you can expand your immediate family to incorporate close friends that share the same likes as you do regarding your observance. And schooling, whether it's an afternoon Hebrew school, or I'm obviously a promoter of a day school, of an all-time Jewish day school, but whichever one, you've got to be consistent. But as Gloria has said, it can't be a drop-off thing. It can't be, here's junior congregation, I'll pick you up in an hour instead of coming into the synagogue with the child. It can't be send your child to a Jewish day school and barely have a Jewish book in the house, or really bring up anything in your daily observance or even at least weekly observance, that's not Jewish. If you have to have some degree of consistency.
A very difficult question to answer, because it's a philosophical question, but there are many people, as an example, who believe that what they're going to do is best for their child if they expose their child to all kinds of cultures, all kinds of backgrounds, and then let them choose later on in life which way they want to live. How do you react to that?
I think it's marvelous to expose children to different cultures. I think it makes for a very broad, well-educated, tolerant human being. But I think to have it done effectively, there first must be established what your own identity is. I mean, you can study Buddhism and you can study anything else you'd like as a Jew, relating and comparing your religion to others. But this business of, well, here's a whole bunch of things and you decide what you want to be, it doesn't work. And it may be a rather extreme example, but I somehow always consider it just saying, well, we're not going to tell you you're a boy or a girl. You'll sort of grow up, and at some age you'll decide whether you want to be a boy or a girl. I mean, it doesn't work that way. You've got to establish who you are very, very early. Then if you want to make choices, if you want to compare a different religion, a different culture, and say, I'm more comfortable with that, okay, that's fine. But it has to come from knowledge of who you are.
I don't think the exposure and exploring can come from ignorance. As Gloria said, you have to know where you're coming from. And I guess I'm not quite as tolerant as Gloria because I think that's playing with fire. We unfortunately see that in couples that are not of the same religion, and they try to observe both religions. And not from a medical, pediatrically experienced point of view, just from mine, I would seem to think that a child will get very mixed signals, very mixed up. It's like being on the fence, not knowing which side you really belong to. And I think you have to show consistency and set boundaries and parameters for the children. And then when they're in college, if they want to start, comparing.
What do these mixed signals do to the child?
Well, firstly, I want to clear up a point. I think it's very important in a mixed marriage that the parents decide before the child is born, or even probably before they're married, how they intend to raise their children, in what religion.
And they come to an understanding.
And they come to an understanding.
Otherwise the marriage is going to be difficult.
It's going to be in real difficulty. And if they're both agnostic, it's a problem. I've seen this very frequently in my own experience in dealing with children and some of their concerns and confusions, that it doesn't work to say both parents have no religion and then therefore the children will have no religion. There again may be examples where it does, but they're the exceptions. I've seen too often that when the child is born, suddenly the family pressures from the two different religions begin to impact on the young parents, and then on the observance that will be held for this young baby. How will he be named? Will he have a bris? Will he have a baptism? All these things suddenly have much more emotional significance than parents often think they will. So I think it's important that an agreement is reached early on, and the best kind of agreement is to decide how the children are to be raised.
If a family, a young couple has a child who begins to grow, and they come to the realization that perhaps they really ought to be taking this whole question more seriously, but they themselves, just don't know how to go about it. What would you advise them to do?
Well, if they were serious and it seemed that they wanted to learn more about their own religion, there are many synagogues have adult education classes. There are rabbis in communities, rabbis' wives, which is what a rebbitzin is, that are easily accessible for either private teaching, suggesting of books. There are community adult education classes. I think it would be step by step, and I also think that if an adult is really serious about this, that I think it's very important as a family that they get involved in a synagogue, because that is a much warmer, open, relaxed environment where it's almost by osmosis they would become exposed gradually to a more enriching religious life.
Could you give some advice to a family that's beginning this seeking?
Well, I think that Shira really has hit the main point. That is to be surrounded by people who reinforce your sense of who you are. If you're a lonely island by yourself, it's rather difficult. I know I was brought up that way, and so I guess I came to this observance of the religion really only after my marriage. And I know what it is to be brought up in a totally non-Jewish environment and to have that sense of alienation. And I guess that's why I feel so very strongly the need to have people around who believe as you do, who reinforce the sense of who you are. Because all my friends were not Jews, and we were friends, but I always knew I was different. And it was a very lonely feeling.
we have to wrap up the program at this point. I want to thank you so much for joining us in a discussion which I think will probably help more people than we imagine. We did say we were going to explain what a rebbitzin is. It's the wife of a rabbi in a community, and I think just from what you have said, people can recognize that they can approach you and they can ask you for help. And Dr. Schrager, certainly you've been a tremendous help. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We would like to thank our guest for joining us for this program. We hope you will tune in for our next program in the series, Judaism Today. Judaism Today is brought to you by the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. We welcome your comments and suggestions, and we invite you to write to us at the United Synagogue of America, Deerfield Road and Academy Terrace, Linden, New Jersey, 07036. That's the United Synagogue of America, Deerfield Road and Academy Terrace, Linden, New Jersey, 07036. One of the most distressing aspects of being a parent today is the environment in which we struggle to raise our children. Corruption, danger, and violence saturate our senses to a point where one must wonder, what can I teach my child to survive what they must inevitably endure? One of the most important lessons of history is that we are not the first generation to feel this way. Every generation has had to cope with just such tensions, though the details may be somewhat different. The obvious question then becomes, what can I teach my children so that they too might survive? To help us with some meaningful answers to these perplexing questions, we are pleased to present Compassionate, Courageous Children. Our guest for this Judaism Today presentation is Dr. Janice Cohn, author of Raising Compassionate, Courageous Children in a Violent World. Welcome to Judaism Today.
Thank you for having me.
How did you first get